Technicolor, and of course over at lbc.co.uk. We're going to pick up now where we left off, continue with your questions in the arena of policing and safety, and we're going to go to Rosie from Islington. Rosie, what's your question?
So my question is from a different perspective of what Natalie said. I'm talking from the perspective of an 18-year-old young Londoner, youth activist within politics. It is proven by countless studies that social and economic forces, such as poverty, inequality, and social exclusion, shape most of the problem of youth violence within this country, especially within black and minority ethnic communities. Now, what would you propose could be done to reduce and eliminate these problems and take these young people out of this cycle? And what is your team currently doing to basically eliminate these problems right now?
That's a brilliant question. Thank you.
So Rosie, it is a brilliant question. So look, I think what you've articulated is one of the realities, without excusing criminality, which is there is a link between poverty, deprivation, unemployment, underemployment, and crime going up. So if you did a map of London, the boroughs, wards, communities in London with the highest amount of crime and violent crime, and then another map with the socioeconomic issues you're talking about, surprise, surprise, one completely overlaps the other. So Sophie and I have articulated the policing side of things, but also supporting young people. That isn't just to prevent them committing crime or being the victims of crime, it's also to enable them to fulfill their potential so they can flourish and thrive. I've benefited, even though I'm from the same community, from great mentors and role models. Unfortunately, too many young Londoners haven't got that. And so one of the things that we've done from City Hall is we've used business rates money to fund 100,000 young people in these communities to have a mentor. Why is that important? I want to be a teacher. I've got no idea, I don't know a teacher. My mentor can help me. I want to be a firefighter, a police officer, a lawyer, a journalist. So your mentor is incredibly important, but also you can be quite easily diverted into the get-rich-quick instant success that sometimes is tempting in some of these communities. We often see, by the way, charismatic gang leaders recruiting outside pupil referral units, outside chicken shops, in estates. And so we need to have an alternative narrative for those young people. Another thing we're doing is in relation to adult education, giving young people who may not have done as well as they could have done at school that second, third chance in relation to our colleges. Free courses if you're young, free courses if you're unemployed, but not just a course to get a certificate. We're working with employers saying, help us devise the courses that enables these people to get the jobs you are creating, because there's no point having the world's greatest city if Londoners can't benefit from these businesses in our city. And the good news is we're seeing more and more Londoners having their potential fulfilled by having youth workers in police stations, youth workers in A&Es, youth workers in youth centres, but particularly in the communities that Rosie, the evidence says, for too long have been let down. They are generations of people let down by successive generations of politicians who don't support them. And by the way, it goes to an issue we're going to come to, housing, overcrowded housing, not being able to have your own bedroom, not having somewhere to play. So you're outside on the streets, getting involved in criminality and so forth. So all the things we're talking about in City Hall, policing, safety, housing, fulfilling potential, they're all linked.
Could you do more to address the point at the heart of Rosie's question, which is the misrepresentation in much of the media of this disproportionate incidence of crime, the fact that it is class and poverty related rather than race related. So all the talk of young black boys, which often seems to inform the rhetoric of politicians like Suella Braverman and plenty of people in the media, I won't mention any names or colleagues, but they do seem to zone in on that, when in fact, as all of the research shows and as communicators like Akala have demonstrated in their book with specific reference to Glasgow, it's a socio-economic issue that drives certain types of crime, not an ethnic one.
Spot on. And that's why...
But you could be doing more.
That's why we have a public health approach. So Sophie alluded to the country's first violence reduction unit, the first one in England and Wales. It's an idea actually I stole from Glasgow. Glasgow had a similar challenge in relation to what you're saying, Rosie, which is working class young people in Glasgow were the victims of homicide and crime. Deprived communities, inequalities in those communities, lack of opportunity. They weren't black though, they were white. So no one talked about white on white crime. It was poor on poor crime. But some people, James's colleagues on LBC, and some others, politicians, talk about black-on-black crime, as if somehow your DNA is linked with being a victim of crime or being a perpetrator. It's not. It's socioeconomic. And so when Natalie was talking about the experience in Enfield and young people, it's a fact that a high number of young people are black, Asian, minority ethnic in London. Not the same in Glasgow, but no one talks about white crime in Glasgow. But why is the public health approach important? It does a number of things. Firstly, with the public health issue, if there's an infection, you try and deal with the infection, right? Medicine. In our case, policing, get the knives off the streets. You stop the infection spreading, really important. But also, why not stop the infection occurring in the first place? Deal with deprivation, deal with lack of opportunity, deal with poor, overcrowded housing. And the public health approach in London, we've started doing since 2019, has seen us bucking the national trend in relation to violent crime, youth crime, knife crime, gun crime, teenage homicides go down. But also these young people fulfilling their potential as well. That's what I call the London promise. You work hard, you get a helping hand, you can achieve anything. For too many Londoners in those communities, they're working hard, there's no helping hand. Our mission in City Hall is to be that helping hand.
I'm going to stay with this for a little longer, actually. Robert Buchanan's been in touch via email and steers us back to that horrible hat trick of racism, misogyny and homophobia plaguing the Met, institutionally so on all three counts. I appreciate you've given Mark Rowley a fairly glowing first report on his first 6 months in the job. What if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't reform? Can we replace it? What options do you face? And what criteria will you be applying to determine whether or not it has moved sufficiently far away from those institutional problems?
Well, I think, Robert, and your question is very fair. And I've had these conversations with the Commissioner, and I'm not breaching confidences by sharing them with you. So the Commissioner, and I agree with him, says if we don't see progress in 2 years, there's a problem, whether it's in him or the police.
How are we going to measure it?
I'm coming to that. So we can't turn it around. These are deep cultural issues overnight. So one of the things we're doing is we're setting up, which is one of the recommendations from Dame Louise Casey, a London policing board, so we've never had in history in London, which is an open, transparent way where experts from outside policing support Sophie and I to support the police, but also publicly hold them to account as well. And we did the same with TfL when I first became mayor in 2016. And so there are metrics we'll have in place, key performance indicators in place, which we'll be publishing in the next couple of months. So you, me, the police all know the criteria we're assessing success by, because it's difficult to overnight change a culture. And listen, anybody who's been in the receiving end of policing over the last 10, 20, 30 years know what I'm talking about. But here's some good news, which is unlike other parts of the country, which have similar problems, by the way, we're shining a light on this. We have the right leadership and we have a route map in relation to how we get out of this. And let's not pretend other parts of the country haven't got similar problems. The advantage is we know the problem, and we've got a route map, and working with Londoners, me, the Commissioner, the police, Sophie, will make that change.
Sophie, final question in this part for you. This is from Misha B, and she writes, I live around the corner from where Zara Alina was murdered. What role do men have to play in tackling violence against women and girls?
Last Sunday, Sadiq and I went to the walk to remember Zara Alina because it was a year since she was brutally murdered. And it's a brilliant question because we always talk about women and girls, and we talk about the victims, and we talk about previously a lot of talk was about how women should change their behaviour. But what we're doing from City Hall and what Sadiq's been leading is how do we get men to change their behaviour? How do we once they're there, how do we get them to change their behaviour? But really importantly, again, it's like the public health approach for youth violence. How do we prevent boys turning into young men who haven't got the right idea about healthy relationships, don't have the right idea about consent, don't respect and don't have that reach. So we are working in schools. Last night I was with an organisation called Tender that we're funding through the Violence Reduction Unit and through MOPAC to do work in schools about healthy relationships, really work with young men and boys about their behaviour, how they can respect each other and respect girls and young women as well. Because it's that prevention. We need to stop thinking about the women and the girls and how they change their behaviour. It's men and boys. They're the people that need to change. And we're working with schools and with the health service as well to do that. It's, again, the public health approach to really make sure that women are going to make that difference. So that women and girls, in the same way as mothers worry about their young men, mothers worry about their young daughters as well when they go out on the street. We want women to be able to walk the streets, not to be harassed, and to be able to come home safely.
Thank you. We move now to the transport-led part of the evening, which, of course, we have touched upon under the air quality and environment as well. But hopefully the first question, which is, I'm going to mispronounce your name, I apologise in advance, Siama from Lewisham, will take us right into the heart of the issue.
Cutting and curtailing some of the major bus routes, including the number 11, that's been operational for 117 years. This complete disregard for working people who've been locating themselves with a commutable distance from work. How is this joined-up thinking when you make cuts to buses but increase bus lanes and expand Ulez?
So I don't know about the number 11 route. I'll go and look at the number 11 route, but we're expanding.
It goes up King's Road, doesn't it? Then over Battersea Bridge. There you go.
So,
hang on, let's just concentrate on the bus question. I appreciate Lewisham, South East London is going to be particularly hit, is it, by the closing of bus routes? All right, well, I can only do one thing at a time. I'm not that good.
So Sam, I'm hoping that Seb knows the number 11 route. I don't. But we are expanding buses in London because it's really important, particularly for those parts of the city that haven't got the tube or DLR or overground and so forth. And I don't talk about this much, but buses are quite important to me because my dad was a bus driver. So here's what we're doing. So other than Shanghai, we now have the largest bus fleet of any city in the world. 9,000 buses. They're roughly speaking 675 routes. A number of buses we were going to cut because the government's asked us to reduce our budget by £500 million over the next couple of years. And so we did consult on cutting 50-odd bus routes. But the amount of people who were telling us stories like yours about the impact it would have on them meant that basically, although TfL couldn't afford to keep those buses going, City Hall used money from City Hall budgets to pay TfL to keep those buses going. So I'm going to ask Seb to deal with the number 11 and what more we're doing to support buses in Lewisham. But in outer London now, we've got a new route starting called the Superloop, which is going to be 4 million kilometres of new buses in outer London in the orbitals. And we're spending £6 million to support those buses that are going to be cut by the government. And I'm hoping that Seb's got some knowledge about the bus you're talking about, because it is really important, because buses, particularly if you're in low income, are cheaper. We're the cheapest buses in the country, £1.75 for one tube. Hopper bus fare means you can have unlimited bus travel for an hour. But I'll ask Seb if he knows.
And before you answer that, Seb, if I can add to your to-do list, the 9 routes identified in March as closing by the beginning of next year, they're still closing, are they?
So there's a lot more routes that were proposed to close originally because of...
I'm going to push you for a yes
or
a no, Seb.
Yes is the answer.
Okay, I'm just unclear on that.
But as the Mayor is very clear, the government in their conditions on funding required TfL to cut many, many more, and it was only the money that the Mayor identified that meant we managed to save many inner and central London bus routes. But I do know about the 11. The 11 is one of those routes that captures the imagination because, of course, it travels through many of the landmarks in central London. And it's not the case that the 11 is going, the 11 is staying. And in fact, the frequency on the 11 is being improved, so it's not a question of being cut. But what will happen is it will terminate at a different place. And to travel the exact same route that the 11 currently travels, you would have to change bus. But it's done on the basis that the clever people at TfL who plan the bus routes and ameliorate the demand of the routes depending on the demand that they see for travel on those routes. They are very clear that this will be more convenient for more people. And of course, because of the hopper fare, you can change onto a different service if you're going in a particular direction, which was not the case, of course, before this mayor took office.
Okay, I might go back to the question of what is it particularly about the Route 11 changes that has exercised you?
It does cover a lot of the landmarks like Westminster,
Yeah.
Parliament, and so how are the working people, as well as tourists, actually going to commute?
Sure, so it will go to, because at the moment it goes to the city, so it goes through Westminster, through many of the West End landmarks and then up through to the city. It will terminate instead at Waterloo. So the planners have identified that the demand is heavier for travel to and from Waterloo Station through that western route. But there is another route, and I'm afraid I can't remember the name of this other route, that will pick up, if you like, the route that the 11 used to take through the city. And that in turn will take a different route from the city all the way down to, I think, Pimlico. So it serves a different corridor, and the models suggest certainly that it will serve more people overall.
So it is. I mean, it's a suck it up kind of answer, isn't it? Because if you're a commuter and you've got to change buses, it's a very different morning experience from just getting on one and then hopping off when you get to work.
Sure, but I mean...
Okay, as long as we're clear.
Of course, but I mean...
But it's because fewer people are using it, right? So what?
Yes, no, I understand that, and I know what a public consultation is, but just from the point of view of the questioner's perspective, that is the pill.
If your particular journey is from the western end of the current terminus of the 11 all the way through to the City of London, then obviously changing bus would be less convenient than at present. The point I'm making is that the vast majority of journeys are not along that full length of the route. In fact, more journeys are to transport hubs like Waterloo Station, which, of course, at present you would have to change, whereas now you wouldn't.
The question, again, because the microphone wasn't in the lady's hand, but the point about Lewisham East not being properly served, can we either hear from the lady in the audience with a microphone or address what we think the question was in the first place? Is that possible?
Sort of 3 from the back, 4 from the back.
Well, I don't know if it'll pick you up. Go on.
I think they can't hear you on the radio, that's all.
Hello.
Hi.
Why does Lewisham still not have any underground routes? I know we have the DLR. I know you go Peckham, you've got overground. But in terms of underground, we don't have any connections. Bromley, the biggest borough in London, no underground. It's train that you're having to rely on. When there's train strikes, there's nowhere to go. Whereas North London, East London, West London, you've got trains going all the way to Uxbridge. You've got Elizabeth Line going to Shenfield. Are they even London boroughs? Whereas Lewisham, a central London borough, there's no underground. What is that about? What is it about? I work in Hackney. I'm taking my bus from Catford to Lewisham, DLR. I get off the DLR, I get on the bus from Bow Church to Hackney to go work in my mental health hospital. Other people, they just take one line on the underground straight to work. Why am I having to pay extra and do all of that chopping and changes to go do my NHS job when other people who live in those 60s commuter towns that can afford to go work in the city, it's one line?
Well, you decide between you.
Yeah. I'll bring in...
Do you want to do my holiday cover?
But there is some good news coming your way, but it's worth just explaining why that is, because you asked the question, why is that? If you look at a map of London, bird's eye view, North London is really, 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 really well served compared to South London and East London, because frankly speaking, historically, that's where wealthier people lived. And I'll speak as a South Londoner, right? And we've just moved City Hall to the East End to help regenerate the East End, because we thought if we move there, we'll have to use public transport there because the mayor's there, right? Because you're right, historically, communities like Lewisham East has been let down, but we have a plan. in relation to the Bakerloo line being extended to south, and I'll bring Seb in to explain to you our plans, but also how we've got a route and we're trying to safeguard it to support people like you in communities who historically have been let down because of lack of investment. And here's the good news. With public transport, it frees up and regenerates communities so they can contribute more to society and get to hubs like the NHS, but also the office to work, schools, leisure, and so forth. Seb?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've answered the question. The Bakerloo line extension, that's the answer. The Bakerloo line should be going to Lewisham. The big problem that we have is that the government needs to step up and fund the capital investment that TfL needs for such projects. It's not just the Bakerloo line extension. There's other things we need to safeguard the route. For example, for Crossrail 2, we've seen the huge advantage that the Elizabeth line has brought, a massive increase in rail travel across the city. 1 in 6 of all rail journeys in the UK now takes place on the Elizabeth line. So if you build it, it works. But we need your support to get the government to stump up the money.
Well, you say that, Seb, but would there, Sadiq Khan, be more funding for transport in London if there was a Conservative mayor of London?
No, because in a year's time there'll be a Labour government. And in a year's time there'll still be a Labour mayor.
Yeah, but if there isn't, if there's a Labour mayor and there's still a Tory government, I mean, genuinely, you've told me on several occasions that you think that funding issues, particularly with regard to transport, would have been handled very differently if there'd been a Tory in City Hall.
So the good news is, we've delivered the Elizabeth line, even though there's a Tory government and a Labour mayor. And you've seen the benefits of the Elizabeth line. We've got to take the heat out of these issues. We've got to stop them being tribal party political. We need consensus, so whoever wins the general election, assuming, God forbid, the Tories win again, that they can see the business case in investing in infrastructure. So the evidence now with the Elizabeth line, and the question of raised Shenfield, those parts of London, Woolwich, I mean, they're now vibrant because of the Elizabeth line. Imagine your community if there was public transport. So I've lived through, James, the extension of the Northern line. Battersea Power Station was a moribund, disused power station. You go there now, it's buzzing. Nine Elms as well. We've now got the overground extended to Bark and Riverside. So I genuinely think...
Just focusing on one question at a time.
The point being that the tube has been extended to go there. No, I accept the properties aren't affordable to most Londoners. I wasn't the guy that gave them permission. That was the previous guy. But the point I'm making is, the numbers of people who use that is phenomenal because it's been built. And so what we'd say to the government, James, is on a cost-benefit analysis, build this thing and it'll bring the money back all day long.
I was going to have a little moan about the state of the E2 from Brentford Morrisons to Northfield, but I think after that intervention from the floor, I'll stay stum on that and count my blessings. We move on now to housing, and I'd like to begin with a question from Piave, who is from Tower Hamlets. Good evening, Piave.
Hi, good evening. Sorry, I know you said go straight to the question, but just have a few bullet points before I get there. But what I did want to say, Sadiq Khan, is that I know one of your main campaigns has been to end homelessness, but what I really want to talk about is the rental market and homes for young workers, and I guess what policies are in place or what's in place to help people actually secure homes for the next generation. I honestly can't start telling you the amount of friends that I have conversations with that say they're working, they contribute their taxes, but they have to move homes. I caught up with a friend who had to move 5 times in a year, and people are living in boxes like a room. It's just not right. And I know there's the whole, Section 21 is looking to be abolished, but I personally don't really think it's enough. And I think that also people that live and work and contribute to London really should have homes locally, especially key workers, for example. People are commuting in, and also families are leaving, schools are seeing less children. So also mental health, if you have to suddenly leave, that's a huge impact on just your day-to-day and everything like that. And it's just become a huge emergency. So, and I guess just my last thing is someone that was older actually said to me, for the first time, I'm worried that the next generation will not be better than us because a lot of people just can't see how they will afford a house or even just leave home. So I really want to know what ways you're actually ensuring that this whole affordable housing thing actually works for Londoners.
Great. So,
And however bad things are now, they are in the process of getting considerably worse.
yeah, so I want to say something which may be controversial, but it's important I say it. All the issues we're discussing, the biggest crisis facing our city is housing. Biggest crisis facing our city is housing. Successive governments, and I'm deliberate in my word, successive governments haven't built enough genuinely affordable housing for Londoners. So the supply has not met demand for decades. But also, as a consequence of that, more and more people are renting privately. There are 2.7 million Londoners living in private rented accommodation. Even if we turned the tap on now, huge numbers of funding, it would take years to meet up with the backlog of homes not built. I'll give you one example. Under the right to buy, thousands of council homes sold off. For every 6 sold off, only one's been replaced. So that shows you the scale of the challenge that there is. And that's why in the short to medium term, we have to fix the private rental market in terms of security of tenure. So there's, long-term tenancies, no-fault eviction goes. The condition of the homes, so they don't suffer from damp and mould, but also the amount of rent you pay. I am in favour of rent controls in London. And by the way, James is about to say, because I'm telepathic, that is not the Labour Party policy, right?
That's incredible.
Let me tell you. Let me tell you why it's so important to have rent controls. I think what a Labour government should do, and what I'm hoping this government does while it's got 12 months in office, is to devolve to London the decision whether we have rent controls. So Scotland were told a year ago when people were campaigning in Scotland for rent freezes, it'd be a disaster if you freeze rents in Scotland. Well, the Scottish government chose to freeze rents for 6 months. It didn't go up a penny. For the next 6 months, it can only go up by 3%. The skies haven't fallen in, but people can now afford to make ends meet. So we've got to have rent controls, rent freezes, fix the rental market, but also massively build genuinely affordable homes for Londoners to stay in. Yes, we are building record numbers of homes, and we've ditched the dodgy definition. So an affordable home when I became mayor was a home where you paid £450,000 to buy, or it was 8% of market value to rent. Now, it's either a council home where you pay a London living rent, a third of average earnings, or shared ownership. But I've got to tell you this, it will take years and years and years for the supply to meet the demand. And I'm hoping the next Labour government devolves the powers to us.
Have you had that conversation?
We have that conversation. And
you're optimistic?
I'm hopeful.
Okay.
I'm hopeful, yeah.
That means optimistic. Why does it have to be so difficult? Tom Copley, Deputy Mayor for Housing, what's the most frustrating thing about your brief?
I think it's working with a government that is not rising to the scale of the challenge. In London, the Mayor of London, City Hall, has devolved powers over housing investment into affordable housing. And with the funding that we've been given, we've done very well. 116,000 affordable homes started since 2016, hitting the target that the government has set, bringing back homes for low-cost rent, for social rent, and starting more than 23,000 new council homes, which is a really huge achievement and sets London apart from the rest of the country. But the amount of funding that we're actually given by the government just simply does not match the need out there. So Sadiq secured just under £5 billion between 2016 and 2023 for affordable housing. We actually need that sum of money every year over 5 years if we're actually going to build at the scale that's necessary. So what we really need is a government that recognises the scale of the challenge and also recognises, although it might sound like a lot to spend that much money on social and affordable housing, the cost of not doing that is much higher. The cost in terms of health, in terms of the impact on kids' education, in terms of the welfare bill, and in terms of the effect on the economy. It makes sense to invest upfront in housing you save later on.
Thank you. My duties this evening involve me being scrupulously impartial, as always. But one reason, perhaps, to look forward to a Labour government is to rob you all of the cover when you're answering some questions, that it's all the fault of the central government, it's all the fault of the people in Westminster. I'm only being sort of mildly facetious. It will change the focus that people like me can have on people like you.
Well, listen, Boris Johnson had the same government we've got, so it's
Yes.
not just about the government. But in the last year Johnson was mayor, the amount of social rented homes, council homes that were begun were 3. Not 3,000, not 300, were 3. Last year we had more than 15,000 begun in London. So the point is, that's the difference having the right team in City Hall with the right values can make.
A question for Melissa Herman, which you may have more context for than I do. What are you doing to ensure that London's estates are refurbished rather than demolished?
So again, I'll bring Tom shortly, but the phrase is regeneration. How do you regenerate an estate? And so we've brought in a number of policies to make sure the refurbishment, the demolition, the regeneration takes place in a sensible way. One is you do not get a penny of support from City Hall unless you have a ballot of everyone on the estate for them to be in favour of the refurb, the regeneration, whatever you want to call it. So you've got to have a ballot, and if it's affirmative, you get money from City Hall. The second thing is we have a London plan. You only get permission for a refurb, a regeneration, if there is a demolition. You must not just replace that with a social rented home, you must add as well. But the question is a good one, because what we don't want to do is give developers the cheap way out of demolishing homes that could be saved. There is an advantage, by the way, of new homes. They are more energy efficient, they can be less carbon intensive, they save people's bills and so forth, and they really help in summer, hot summers when there's heat waves now, and cold winters when it's really cold. But Tom?
Absolutely. This is all about empowering tenants and empowering residents so that they can decide their own future. And that's what the resident ballot requirement has really done. And we've had more than 20 successful ballots. It's really improved the way that councils and housing associations engage with residents. And often, we have to be honest about, there's lots of absolutely brilliant council housing and social housing that's been built over many years. But some of the council housing and social housing that was built was not built very well. And it's certainly at the end of its useful life. And in those circumstances, it's right to ask residents, do you want a new and better home that's energy efficient, that meets modern standards, particularly space standards, and things like that. What the government should be doing, though, is making more money available for retrofit. So that we can actually invest as well in estates without knocking them down, making them energy efficient. I think that's really crucial too.
Fair enough, thank you. I think I will take another message from a listener now. This is something that pops up on the radio show a lot. Tracy writes, I'm on a variable mortgage that has gone up £1,000 a month in the last year. What are you doing to help Londoners who can't afford to live in London anymore?
So in relation to somebody's got a mortgage, or
I guess
just
so.
generally
Well, I
speaking?
think that Teresa was going to ask about why private sector rents are so high as well, but we kind of touched on some of this territory, but it's an emotional way of phrasing it. Londoners who won't be able to raise the next generation of Londoners.
No, so I predict, I'm afraid, from the experts I've spoken to and Tom and I have listened to, that over the next year, you're going to see homes repossessed in numbers we've not seen since the 80s and 90s. Why do I say that? Tracy's example actually is not as bad as some of the ones I've heard. So if you're somebody with a £350,000 mortgage on a 2.5% fixed term and it comes to an end now, the 6% fixed term would mean your mortgage increases every month by £700. Every month by £700. And somebody earlier on asked about, your head just being above the water. That means you can't afford it, which is why the homes may become repossessed. So I wrote last week to Jeremy Hunt and Michael Gove with some ideas that could alleviate and ameliorate some of this stuff, which is, saying to mortgage companies, forcing them, listen, give people the option to go interest only. Don't penalise them when it comes to their credit going forward. Give them a mortgage holiday, no repossessions, and to give the government credit, which is very unlike me. During the pandemic, they did pull out all the stops to avoid repossessions. They did pull out all the stops to avoid those who are renting privately being evicted. I think we're facing a similar crisis now with mortgages going up and rents going up. And that's why the rent freeze idea in Scotland, I think, would be really easy for the government to do. And a lot of landlords are brilliant. A lot of those landlords have paid off their mortgages, have a rent freeze in relation to tenants who are in privately. And for those landlords struggling with a mortgage, say to the mortgage companies for a period of time, allow them to pay interest only to help all of us through this cost of living crisis. It benefits nobody. Somebody's home being repossessed because they've got a mortgage they can't keep up. It helps nobody. Somebody being evicted because they can't afford to pay rent.
Like, again, you would need powers from Westminster in order to enact that in London.
So what we can do, and we are doing, is without powers, again, using City Hall money, and it's finite, we're paying for citizens' advice bureaus, law centres and other experts to keep people advised, because often people don't realise they're entitled to benefits. They often panic when they're in debt. They go to a loan shark or somebody who's not reliable with huge interest rates. So what we can do, James, albeit we haven't got the powers from government, is use the limited resources we have to give good advice to people, because often people lack that good advice because they know that they're worried and they're stressed and they don't often make rational, cogent decisions that would help them and their families.
And you know, they get a very tough time, but landlords will be very worried at the moment as well.
Absolutely.
Their livelihood depends upon the mortgage that they took out when they became...
It's also their pension, right? A lot of people,
yes.
they didn't get a pension. They bought a property to rent out. And again, we mentioned, demonising young people from certain ethnicities. We shouldn't demonise all landlords, right? Because, many landlords, for them, it's their pension.
Yeah. Move on to London's economic recovery now, or I presume in theory rather than in practice, but we'll see. Let me begin with Tim, who's in Eltham. Tim, what's your question?
Good evening, panel, and Mr. O'Brien.
Hello.
Mr. Khan, you mentioned the hard Brexit in your opening speech. What are you doing or going to do for businesses that are having difficulties exporting into Europe and with the loss of revenue?
Did you not get the memo about moving on?
No.
You and me both, Tim. What are we going to do?
Well, Tim, firstly, what you've done in the last 30 seconds is something that no government minister is willing to do, is to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the extreme hard Brexit. There's like a vow of silence. No one's talking about what's causing many of these problems. And actually, the COVID pandemic, Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, is giving the government an excuse to blame those things rather than what you know as a business person are the real problems for you, your business, and other businesses in London. So we're doing a number of things, Tim, notwithstanding the extreme hard Brexit that we have. So we have in City Hall, Rajesh Agrawal, who's Deputy Mayor for Business, chairs what's called London and Partners. That's, if you imagine, that's our trading arm. And so we're supporting businesses to trade with the European Union and trade around the world. We've had more than 70 trade missions around the world that Rajesh has led. Through our efforts, we've brought 1,600 businesses to London who have started or scaled up, and that's led to £6.5 billion of money coming into London. But I've got to make this point, which is really important, and I say this to my own party as well as to the government. On our doorstep, put aside there are friends, there are allies, there are neighbours, is a market of 500 million, right? If you're a shopkeeper, if you're a small business, if you're a medium business, if you're a country, the person you do the most trade with is your neighbours. It is bonkers having all our eggs in a trade deal with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, countries in East and Southeast Asia, and not having a good deal with our partners in the European Union. So I'm in favour of convergence, closer ties with the EU, rather than a divergence as some sort of virility test of how macho and brilliant we are. We're a country of 65 million. We've got to be honest about that. 65 million. So I was in the City of London yesterday. There's a brilliant Lord Mayor, Nicholas Lyons, in the City of London. The City of London doing great work in partnership with us, having good links with the EU. We export services hugely as a city. We need financial passporting. But also we've got to recognise, and I did this last Friday, that there are many Londoners, and they're Londoners, by the way, who are EU citizens. They're our friends, neighbours, colleagues, and we should thank them for staying. We should thank them for staying because they help. They help our city be what it is, which is the greatest city in the world.
You overlooked during your slightly unimpressed list of things that the Conservatives have put in place in order to fill some of the gaps left by Brexit. You overlooked Daniel Kawczynski's sterling work as our trade envoy to Outer Mongolia.
I mean, seriously. James is not even joking, right? This is, and the government tries to...
Hang on, I wasn't queuing you up for another spiel there. I was trying to insert a little levity into proceedings. Why is Keir Starmer so timorous on this issue, in your personal opinion?
Well, I wouldn't accept that description of my good friend Keir. But I think the point is this. Look, I respect, as Keir has to, the 52% who voted to leave the EU. I think it can't be right. It goes back to what Matt said at the beginning about, democracy. You've got to accept the verdict of the British people, right? And so the British people, it upsets me. I'm heartbroken, voted to leave the European Union. Keir, like me, is a passionate Remainer, but he's got to accept the verdict of the British people. That's not to say, though, James, you can't make the best of a bad hand. So what I'm hoping the next Labour government will do is with this bad hand we're given. And by the way, this hand cannot be as successful as the EU was, but make the best of it. And what Keir Starmer, David Lammy, Rachel Reeves, the team will do if they're given the trust by the British public to be the next Labour government is make the best of a bad hand.
It's not up to them, though, is it? The control is in Brussels.
Oh, listen, it's ridiculous. We are rule takers, not rule makers. So we've gone from a position being inside the room, making the rules, which all 28 countries have got to abide by being outside the room and being told to take it or leave it. And by the way, President Obama in 2016 said, and he was castigated by the media, including those that work in LBC, castigated by the media and the Conservative government for saying, listen, if you leave the EU, when it comes to doing a trade deal with the USA, you'll go to the back of the queue, right? And Sunak has met President Biden a number of occasions. What has Biden said? Join the back of the queue, right? And so I'm afraid, that's what these Brexiteers did. They lied to us, and now we're paying the price.
Thank you. Don't you just hate people who keep banging on about Brexit? The next question is from Tamisha, who's from Barking. Tamisha, thank you.
Hi there.
Hello.
My question is, with the current economic climate, why do the poorest boroughs, such as Barking and Dagenham, not have the budget to implement free school meals for all children under 16 like Tower Hamlets? This is a horrendously major issue for me, especially as a minor myself. My peers are not able to get hot meals. Without hot meals, we won't be able to focus in school. We won't have the nutritious to. Without focusing in school, we will never break class barriers. Essentially, we're being failed.
So, Tamisha, thank you for saying what you did and the way you said it. And this is personal to me because I received free school meals, and it was so reassuring for mum and dad knowing they didn't have to worry about another thing, right? Their kids eating. But one thing, Tamisha, I've not forgotten is how embarrassed I felt getting my token, because there was a separate queue you'd queue up in. You'd get your token, and then because we'd go late to the dining room, we'd sit separately from our mates who weren't on free school meals. And so that's why, notwithstanding the really tight budgets we've got, we're going to make history, because for the first time ever, every child in a primary school in London from September will be receiving free school meals. Okay.
I don't want to be rude, but I don't think Tamisha's at primary school.
I'm very nervous, and I don't like criticising councils, and I'm not going to criticise Barking and Dagenham, because in the last 13 years, they've faced massive cuts in their budgets, all councils, Tory, Labour, Lib Dem. They've lost about half of their money. And so councils are making tough choices. The good news is 5 councils in London, Tower Hamlets is one, Westminster, Newham, Southwark and Islington do provide free school meals for their primary school children. And the great thing about it is the children become more productive, the kids are eating a healthy, nutritional meal, but every child who has a free school meal, their parents save £440 for that child, and that can make a big difference to people like you, your neighbours, and your community, because if your children be more productive at school, they can fulfil their potential. It goes to a question asked earlier on about socioeconomic factors, right? If you're sharing a bedroom, 3 of you in a bedroom because of overcrowded housing, you're not eating a healthy meal at school, you may not be eating a healthy meal in the evening, you're skipping breakfast, how can you be surprised if the young person's going to a chicken shop where you can, for £1, get 6 pieces of fried chicken and fries? And then we complain about the obesity crisis in London, which leads to more than 4 out of 10 children aged 10 being overweight or obese. It's all linked in relation to young people not fulfilling their potential. So we are going to do it this September because it's really important those families have support during this cost of living crisis.
I'm not sure you can get away with not criticising Barking and Dagenham, can you, on this, when you've pointed out, and as Tamisha has pointed out as well, other councils have simply got different priorities.
It's not that, it's Barking and Dagenham have got more poverty. So they've got other priorities in relation to helping the poor people in Barking and Dagenham. So they do other things to help poor people in Barking and Dagenham in relation to after-school clubs, in relation to holiday schemes. And so with the final limited budget they have, it is the most deprived borough arguably in the country, definitely in London. And so they're spending their money in a way that supports the people most needed in Barking and Dagenham. How
much would it cost? Do you know? It's a bit of an unfair question. How much would it cost to do for secondary schools what you're going to do for primary schools?
I've not got the figure to hand. We have got the figure. There's a slight difference though, which is this. In secondary schools now, most schools either have a fingerprint system or a card system. So there's less stigma now than there was when you and I were maybe at school. And so in a secondary school, it would be possible to micro-target those children who need the most support. So actually, I'm somebody who says for secondary schools, let's try and be a bit more sophisticated. If there's limited resources, and target the free school meals. If it's possible for universality, great. If you're saying, if somebody was saying, we can't really do that, Sadiq, I'd want to target that to those children most in need.
It's another rollback on national policy as well, isn't it, this very week on free school meals, a wider rollout of free school meals nationally under a future Labour government. I think we've seen...
Well, let's wait and see. I'm hopeful.
You're very hopeful, aren't you? It's the hope that gets you. The despair we can cope with. It's a question from Lakshmi, who's in... oh, no, that's in the room. I do apologise. Lakshmi from Holborn, where are you? And what would you like to ask the Mayor?
James. It's Lakshmi.
Lakshmi, apologies.
Hi, Sadiq. I'm a doctor in the NHS. I'm sure you're aware of the strikes. Over my 11 years of training so far, I've racked up more than £100,000 in debt. I'm still sitting exams which cost thousands of pounds. Every year we pay membership fees, we pay GMC fees. I'm earning £12.50 an hour. This affects every healthcare worker across the country, but it disproportionately affects us in London, who cannot afford to keep up with the exorbitant rent and cost of living crisis in London. London has the busiest emergency departments. We have the highest patient demand and an exhausted workforce. I have 3 questions for you. Do you think this is fair? Where do you stand on the junior doctor strikes? What will you do to improve the situation for doctors and all other NHS workers in London? Because claps don't pay our bills, Mr. Khan.
Right. Beautifully done. We're very short of time, and I want all 3 questions answered, so it's going to have to be quite quick fire.
Yeah, sure.
Is it fair?
So, Lakshmi, firstly, thank you. It's not fair. I do support the junior doctors' strike. The best way to support you is vote Labour at the next general election.
You do support the strike?
Absolutely. Lakshmi, listen, the London living wage, which we've quadrupled the amount of employers paying the London living wage, is £11.95 an hour. You're earning just above that. And I also have never met a junior doctor who's not knackered, overworked and tired. I also met during the pandemic people like you risking your lives to look after people like my family and Londoners. That's why I began my answer by saying thank you.
Lakshmi, did he answer all 3 questions then?
I think he did. I just hope that Labour will make some changes.
Well, let me deal with that. It's a very important point. Listen, in 1997, Lakshmi, I'm a bit older than you. So in 1997, the NHS was on its knees. It was on its knees. I had family members who would wait, 12 hours in A&E to be seen. People in trolleys who would lose their lives before they were seen by a doctor. And it is a fact. The Labour government in 1997 saved the National Health Service. It is a fact, right? It is also a fact. It is also a fact that a Labour government, in the face of a huge opposition. I mean, if you think the Ulez is bad, it was really bad before the NHS was set up by a Labour government. We set up the Labour government. And I can promise you The next Labour government will do what's not been possible in the last 14 years, is to support everyone who works in the NHS. And you'd be the first one to say it's more than just doctors. It's the nurses, it's the porters, it's those who do the x-rays. It's everyone who's part of the NHS family who's been let down over the last 14 years. Austerity was a political choice made by a Conservative government. Five Tory Prime Ministers, David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak. All 5 of them are responsible. The only way to change things is by voting Labour in the mayoral elections next May and in the general elections later on next year.
They had an awful lot of help, those politicians, from right-wing newspapers, didn't they?
And, you know...
Did you have a nice time at Rupert Murdoch's summer party?
Well, listen, I do not apologise for spending time with people who disagree with me. I've been on the Nick Ferrari show, for goodness sake.
Well, you didn't answer the question. Did you have a nice time?
It was all right. I mean, I don't drink, so I didn't get to... I mean, I'm told the champagne was great, good quality stuff, but I don't drink, so... water tastes the same wherever you are.
We are out of time. I'd like to thank everybody who's come along this evening in particular for a really lovely evening, actually. Thank you very much. That's a round of applause for the people providing the round of applause, but also, of course, for the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, for Seb Dance, Sophie Linden, Tom Copley and Shirley Rodriguez. You've been listening to the State of London. I'm James O'Brien, back on air at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I know, I can't believe they worked me that hard either. Now time for the 9 o'clock news with Steve Holden.
Peter Bark to you too, thank you. Very kind, thank you. I can't think of a better way to spend an Eve than the Indigo with you lot.
Thanks, guys. That was really lovely. Thanks ever so much. Take care.